Welcome to Pensar Basketball Not Live. We'll talk about that later. Today, I want to talk about the Toronto Raptors and their recent winning streak and just how the Raptors are winning, because I think that sometimes it's really important to decipher between good wins, bad wins, who are you beating, and stuff like that. So, I want to take a look at this as a pros and cons opportunity to sort of look at the big debate in Raptorland is something we've talked about in a previous live, which is specifically should the Raptors pull this apart at the trade deadline. The trade deadline is just about a week away at this point, 8 days, 9 days away. The Raptors are going to make decisions, long term decisions on Bruce Brown, Chris Boucher, Jakob Poeltl, Kelly Olynyk, and Davion Mitchell, all players who allegedly, according to sources that are close to the team, are available and available at the right price. The Raptors obviously don't just want to give away players that are serviceable. They want equity, draft picks, young players, second draft guys. And the Raptors have made a deadline trade every single year for the last 4 years. They made a trade for Thaddeus Young. They made a trade for Jakob Poeltl. Last year, they made a deal for Bruce Brown. Well, that was before the deadline, but they made a trade for Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji. So clearly, as GMs around the league get a little bit desperate, the Toronto Raptors, of course, have been one of the best defenses in the league throughout this win streak. So maybe some of these pieces like Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, Jakob Poeltl, et cetera, that had lost their shine amidst a lot of losing will regain some of their lost luster as the Raptors prove, almost as a proof of concept, that hey, these players can still contribute to winning. And if Jakob Poeltl can do this with Scottie Barnes, what's stopping him from doing it with Luka Doncic? What's stopping him from doing it with Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, et cetera? So I do think that there are some teams that clearly have some deficiencies, and some of these players can fill those gaps. But if you're a Raptor fan, you're saying, well, wait a second, aren't we a basketball team? Don't we play in the NBA? Aren't we competing? Shouldn't we want to keep these players? And I've been firmly on the side of I will not root against wins. I will not root against losses. I'm just going to let it roll how it rolls. And during yesterday's live, I said, I think that it would be a huge gut punch and a bit of a blow to this team for them to go to the players and say, I know you guys are rolling, but we're going to tear it apart anyway because we're too far behind, even though mathematically you're not eliminated. So you can't use that excuse, and you're rolling. So you don't know what the internal belief system is with these players. You don't know what Scottie Barnes believes. You don't believe. Certainly, this team is not just going out there grinding defensively every single night. Playing their hearts out defensively and competing offensively every single night, boarding. The pressure that they're applying. It's not just that they're winning games because they're shooting well. Actually, they're winning games in spite of the fact that they're not shooting that well and they're not playing that well offensively. It is the effort and the defense and the hustle that is really carrying this team. So you do worry about the consequences of then incentivizing or disincentivizing winning by effectively saying our assertion of values is we prefer the draft pick. Now, screw your winning. But this is a more nuanced discussion, and the people on the other side of this argument of, hey, but what about Cooper Flag? What about Ace Bailey? What about these players? What about Dylan Harper? Don't we still need that type of talent? I think they have a point as well. So I want to look at the pros and cons. So I want to take a look at one of the main introduction points to this subject, which is just how the Raptors are winning. Well, they've beaten some pretty competent teams, but those teams have not been overly healthy. They've also beat some not so competent teams, and those teams have been not as healthy either. I mean, if you're looking at, for instance, the New Orleans Pelicans, yes, the Pelicans had strung together 7 out of 10 wins recently, but the Pelicans were without Herb Jones. Does that matter? Sure, it matters, I guess, to some extent. And, you could look at the Boston Celtics. They were perfectly healthy, but they were amidst a stretch of just horrible games. That same team, minus Kristaps Porzingis, went out and nearly lost to the New Orleans Pelicans. They nearly lost to who else did they? They almost lost to the LA Clippers, who weren't playing their starters. So that was just, you catch a team at a bad time. The Orlando Magic just lost to the Miami Heat last night. They had Franz Wagner back. You faced the Orlando Magic without Franz Wagner and you beat them. So is this just fluky, right? Is this fluky or is this sustainable? I think right now the Raptors are playing roughly 500 basketball. I know they've won 6 of 7, and that you could probably sell yourself into saying that they're playing much more than that. But I really do think that if the Raptors played the way they're playing right now the entire year, they'd probably be roughly a 500 team, which is funny because that's kind of how I saw this team coming into the season. I saw them as a 36 win team. So they're finally on pace to play how they're supposed to have been playing all year. And my projection for them was a mid-level play-in team. And now my projection would be you'll have to play above your head to get to the bottom of the play-in. At which point, all bets are off. It's a single game elimination. Anything could happen. You could have a cold shooting night and you're out. The other team could have a cold shooting night and they're in. And that's, one side of the equation, which is I don't think the Raptors are playing like a championship team right now. 6 of 7 is a little misleading. The other thing I will say is, one of the things that I said earlier was, win, lose, or draw, you're going to win with youth, right? You're going to win because if you're winning, it means that Scottie has taken a step, RJ has taken a step, Gradey has taken a step, Ja'Kobe's taken a step. And at that point, you can't be against the winning. But I do think that it's worth noting just who has been contributing the most to these wins. Now, I don't think box plus minus is a perfect stat, but I do think that it's worth noting that the Raptors over the last few games, last 6, 7, 8 games, where they have been doing a lot of winning, it has been largely due to the play of some veterans, specifically Chris Boucher, Bruce Brown, Jakob Poeltl. You could even include a guy like Davion Mitchell, who has played better during this stretch, but has not by any means been perfect. I think he posted a negative 9.8 box plus minus last night. So if you're looking at this as, hey, this is because Scottie is just playing out of his mind, it's not entirely true. I mean, he's still, over the last 7 games, he's still right around or below 20 points per game. It's not like Scottie took some mammoth leap and he's now averaging 30 and he's just putting the team on his back. Defensively, however, Scottie is trying harder. And I think that, his compete level defensively has been infectious for this team. But make no mistakes, Bruce Brown, you take Bruce Brown out of this, the winning goes away. You take Chris Boucher out of this, Kelly Olynyk out of this, and I don't think you're winning these games. And so I think that sort of begs a larger question, which has long-term implications, which is, hey, wait a second. We've been here before where people on expiring contracts, i.e. Fred VanVleet, are leading to a lot of winning. And in order to continue winning, you're going to have to resign them. So I think at this point, it would be very, very important for the Raptors to at least determine what is the figure at which you are comfortable signing a 32-year-old Chris Boucher. What is the figure that you're comfortable with signing a Bruce Brown, right? Because again, the value is going up for these players. That's a catch-22 because while you may be able to extract a little bit more for them at the trade deadline from a contender, you also will have to match that value if you continue winning with them going forward. Now, Bruce is not a dummy. Bruce Brown is a very smart person. He understands that winning equals money. And everyone in the NBA understands that winning equals money. Players on teams that are playoff teams are viewed very differently when it comes to contract negotiations and trade negotiations than players who are on bottom feeders. A case in point, Kelly Oubre. Kelly Oubre averaged over 18 points per game for the Charlotte Hornets some years ago and ended up having to sign for a minimum. Case in point, Gary Trent Jr. last year. Pretty serviceable, had a cold shooting streak for a bit, but the Raptors were a bottom 8 team in the league, bottom 6 team in the league. They tanked towards the end, and Gary unfortunately paid the price for that because he had to sign for a minimum with the Milwaukee Bucks. So players like Chris Boucher, while maybe in hindsight, if the Raptors had continued their losing ways and bottomed out as one of the 3 worst teams, their value, their negotiating power at the free agency table would be inexplicably sort of tied to that. They would be tied to the losing. Bruce Brown would be tied to the losing. He would have been a participant in all this losing. But now, flip it around. Now they're part of the winning. And that winning will result in more money. There's another implication that, if you make the playoffs, there's a lot of stars, Luka Doncic, Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, that have missed an extraordinary amount of time this year. And I think all of those guys at the absolute best could have potentially made a bid for All NBA. Does Scottie Barnes get some All NBA consideration if the Raptors make the play-in or the playoffs? Can enough people justify it? Do the Raptors become enough of a what have you done for me lately Cinderella story in the Eastern Conference where they string together a bunch of wins and suddenly Scottie's getting some buzz for All NBA? Now, he's my favorite player, but if he's not your favorite player, maybe you have some feelings about a supermax contract for Scottie Barnes adding $45 million to your books for the next 4 or 5 years. Because some people, let's be honest, have an issue with him getting a max contract. I don't know how those people are going to react to him potentially making $270 million. There's also the other implication of, what does this say about Immanuel Quickley? Do you know for sure that your defense will be able to hold when Immanuel Quickley comes back? See, because if you go into this trade deadline and you stand pat, or Lord help me, if you buy at the trade deadline, let's just say you say, you know what, we're going to do the same thing we did with Thaddeus Young, where we feel like this team is really turning a corner and we're going to actually add reinforcements. We don't feel necessarily long-term comfortable with Orlando Robinson as a backup center, so we're going to add a rim protector. We're going to go and trade that Indiana pick to get a rim protector to come onto the second unit. Well, a couple of things happened there. Number one, you're depleting assets instead of adding them when it's pretty clear you should be adding draft equity at this point. Number two, what happens is some of your young players that we maybe had thought later in the season were going to catch some minutes, Ulrich, Ja'Kobe, get more premier roles, Jonathan Mogbo, guys who really need that time later on. I feel like those players are probably going to get shafted in the pursuit for the play-in. And I think that's a nuanced discussion in and of itself. You know, if I apologize in advance if I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but I do think that is worth noting. I do think 11 minutes into this video would be important to address why this is not a live. So so May 12th, 2024, we did a lottery special. So when the Raptors draft lottery happened, the Raptors ended up, losing their pick, etc. I accidentally left the screen on. We were watching the lottery live. I left the screen on, and I think it went to some sort of sport. I think it was hockey or curling or something. And I just was not paying attention to the screen, didn't realize that sport was pretty much broadcasting. That was our channel's first copyright strike. Now, attention to detail must be my weakness, because I didn't realize that you need to complete copyright school. If you're a content creator, if you get a copyright strike, you get your first copyright strike, you got to complete copyright school. I completed copyright school months after that happened. So had I completed it that day, this would not be an issue, and I would be able to live stream right now. Unfortunately, I completed copyright school November 27th. I did not realize that within 90 days of completing copyright school, if you get another copyright strike, you actually get banned from YouTube for a period of time, like a week, from live streaming. I didn't know this. I didn't think about this. And frankly, I thought there's no way that stupid thing that I did is ever going to happen again, because I'm maybe so mindful of it, never realizing that posting that Scottie Barnes NBA TV interview would actually get me another copyright strike. So there goes 2 copyright strikes, and there goes my live streaming. So hopefully I will still be able to post videos. It'd be really bummer if I'm not able to post this video. I'm going to try, but for the foreseeable future, which is pretty much the next week, so that'll be Wednesday's game, tomorrow's game, Friday's game, and potentially one more game, you're not going to have live streams unless they lift it at some point, at which point, of course, I'll go live. I love live streaming. Live streaming has been a great way to connect with the community. But for now, I'm going to make these videos. I'm going to try to post them. And if at some point I lose access to posting, well, then I guess we're just shit out of luck. So I wanted to address that and just let the community know that I'm not just bailing on the live streams. It is YouTube that is restricting me from live streaming right now. And that's perfectly fine. I accept it. I made a mistake, posting that video. I accept the response. I respect the process of, protecting people's copyright. I did not mean to do that, but intention has nothing to do with copyright infringement. So I've made a mistake, and I would naturally have to pay the consequences for it. So unfortunately for you guys, that you are also paying the consequences for it, as you have a delay in your regular post-game coverage. But I will try to do my best to record these videos in a timely manner and upload them, and hopefully I'm still allowed to do that. Okay, moving on. There was a debate that happened on Twitter Spaces the other day, specifically between myself and another gentleman who I used to be friends with, and we were talking about, what about the minutes? We're not getting enough minutes from Ja'Kobe. We're not getting enough minutes for these young players, and these players need minutes to develop. So I want to push back on that a little bit. While I agree that reps and minutes are the best tool to learn, there's also more that goes into learning and development than simply just putting guys out there to play. And if you want any example of this, you can look at the Portland Trailblazers with Dražen Petrovic. You can look at Jermaine O'Neal. You can look at Zach Randolph. playing on good teams behind good players around veterans is proven to help. If you want to look at an example of shit not working out, why don't you just look at Davion Mitchell? How much has Davion Mitchell actually developed as a basketball player since he came into the NBA? Not shade on Davion. Davion has played really perfectly competent basketball for the last couple of weeks for the Raptors, but Davion was gifted like 27 minutes a night, 28 minutes a night with the Sacramento Kings as a rookie. He started some games as well. Those minutes have progressively gone down, 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 down until he got to the Raptors. And of course, Emmanuel Quickley's injury has resulted in more minutes for Davion, but he has never averaged 28 minutes again. And giving him all that opportunity early, while well meaning because he was a lottery pick and you were a bad team, didn't really result in the type of development that you were hoping for. See, because development is not just about playing, it's not just about playing games, it's about breaking down film. It's about consequences. It's about learning from your veterans. It's about absorbing the winning culture. So while on one hand you would say, well, I really want Jakob Poeltl and Ulrich to start, and I want us to lose a bunch of games, and I want us to get this draft pick, it's also really important that players have a full spectrum in terms of the learning. That spectrum includes the 3-on-3 stuff that the Raptors love to do because of their European influence. 3-on-3 has been proven year over year in Europe to produce better basketball players and better basketball decisions. Because really, when you break it down, basketball is a game of 2-on-1s, 3-on-1s, 3-on-2s. Learning how to navigate those situations without all the clutter and noise of a 5-on-5 scrimmage or a 5-on-5 game is actually just the perfect way to develop. If you can teach Jakob Poeltl defensively how to guard a 2-on-1, and if you can teach Jakob Poeltl how to exploit a 2-on-1 offensively, I think you have done a great job. If you teach these guys how to exploit a double team, right, you're teaching them how to play basketball. And some of the fundamentals are really missing with some of the young players, Jonathan Mogbo, Ulrich, even Ja'Kobe and Jamal Shead. So, building up those fundamentals through reps in the G League, through, practices, through 3-on-3s, through play groups, etc. And then occasionally, having some time, again, within the confines of the team to go out there and, play off of Bruce Brown, play off of Kelly Olynyk, play off of Jakob Poeltl. It does lessen the burden, right? I also want to say that winning, we talked about winning this offseason, the winner effect. Winning has a remarkable effect on people's psychology. It has a remarkable effect on their perspective of themselves. It has a phenomenal effect also on how people perspectivize themselves in the world, right? Winning is very cathartic. Winning is deeply, good, for you, especially when you are a person who cares about winning. And the cool thing about the Raptors in terms of how they draft is they want to draft people who care about winning. They've drafted not a single player that on that team would ever tell you that they're indifferent about wins and losses. Winning is infectious. It is something that, becomes a little bit addictive as well. And the Raptors are, teaching these young kids that, hey, look, these veterans, this is how you win. And Jacoby is sitting there in those games, watching Bruce Brown and watching Kelly Olynyk and watching Jakob Poeltl. Ulrich is sitting there on the bench watching Kelly Olynyk, Orlando Robinson, Jakob Poeltl play, and it's building something for him to aspire to as well. So we don't want to underestimate that by simply saying the best way to develop Ulrich is to put him out there for 20 minutes a night and just throw him to the wolves and have him pick up a bunch of fouls. Because I'll tell you one more thing as a winner. I want you to imagine that you are a 21-year-old who really cares about your teammates and you really care about winning. And I want you to imagine the psychological toll that knowing your minutes are costing your team wins, especially when your team was winning when you weren't playing. I don't know what that does for you. There's also the final, part of this, which I really wanted to hit on, which is the Emmanuel Quickley component of this. Do you know for sure that when he comes back, your defense will sustain itself? Now, I don't think Emmanuel Quickley is a bad defender. I really don't. I refuse to buy into that. He's been a perfectly fine defender for most of his life. It's worth noting, though, that I don't think he applies pressure at the point of attack quite the way that Davion Mitchell does. Few do. And if that is a very fundamental part of how you've been successful, I don't think it's the only reason you've been successful, but it is a part of why you've been successful defensively. And your defense is basically carrying your offense. Do you believe that the upgrade that Emmanuel Quickley offers when he comes back, plus Emmanuel Quickley coming back, pretty much removing the only pure point guard on your team under 6'4", Jamal Shead from the rotation, because you're certainly not playing Jamal Shead plus Emmanuel Quickly plus Davion Mitchell plus Bruce Brown. You're not playing all those guys. Does that kill whatever vibe you have? It's also worth noting that the Raptors have a brutal schedule right after the trade deadline. So the last thing in the world you want is you miscalculate this. Emmanuel quickly comes back, all the losing starts. You don't trade all these veterans. And so all of this winning just basically was for naught. Paths forward for the Raptors. Path number one, make a conclusive decision on what you actually believe this roster is and can be, and then just push for the plan, right? If you believe that, I'm not against trading anybody at this point other than Scottie Barnes. Like, obviously, I'll have some sentimental reactions if they traded Mogbo or Ulrich or, Gradey or Ja'Kobe or whatever. But I think that it is very paramount that the Raptors make a decision and not do that thing that they have done far too often over the last few years, which is sort of push the can down the road and say, we'll deal with it later. No, decisions are hard to make, but you have to make them, because not making decisions can paralyze you. And that state of paralysis and analysis paralysis can lead to disastrous consequences, because the way I see it, when a car is coming at you, you dive left, you dive right. If you stand there, you're waiting for the car to decide. And I think too often the Raptors have waited for the car to decide. Push the can down the road with Pascal, push the can down the road with Fred, and what do you have for it? You have 3 first-round picks and Ochai, or 2 first-round picks and Ochai Agbaji and Bruce Brown, right? So if you know for sure that Bruce Brown is just basically chasing a contract at this point, and you know that he's going to go to the first contender that offers him, more than you can, or maybe he's sour about his situation here. He didn't like how he's been used. He's leaked it through the media a couple times that he's had some trouble adjusting to his new role. That he preferred a situation where he had the ball in his hands more as a backup point guard in Denver, etc. So if you think that this guy is just gonna leave, well, he's a huge part of why you're winning. So losing him and then also worsening your draft pick makes no sense. So I feel like at this point, you need to really, really lock down into what you're doing. Do you believe Bruce Brown's a part of the future? Do you believe Chris Boucher is a part of the future? Anything that's not going to be serving you 2 years from now, I think you need to remove it from your roster. That's the first thing. The second thing I think the Raptors need to do is, once you do that evaluation, I think you might need to add some reinforcements. Now, I don't know if those reinforcements are just about swapping some pieces. I don't know if it's trading some youth. I don't know if it means, packaging 2, 3 players for one upgrade, even if that upgrade is on a bigger contract or a longer term contract. I don't know if that means trading RJ Barrett. I really don't. What I do know is that I don't believe, as constructed, that this team is going to be competitive in a playoff series. And if the goal is the playoffs, why half-ass it? Why send your team into Boston to be swept? I think that a competent rim protector on the second unit is very important. If you believe in your heart of hearts that Orlando Robinson is that guy, fine. But I think you need to explore the idea of Walker Kessler. I think you need to explore the idea of Nick Claxton. I think you need to look at that and just say, okay, if we're going for it, let's go for it with a young piece, right? Let's add a young piece to this. If it costs us a first round pick, it costs us a first round pick, but get that piece in tow right now, because right now it feels like you're winning despite the fact that your youth is not playing, or some of your young players are not playing exceptionally well. Jamal Shead has not been one of the 5, 6 biggest reasons of your winning. Jakob Poeltl has not been one of the 7, 8, 9 biggest reasons you're winning. Scottie Barnes has been good, but I think it's worth noting that Emmanuel Quickly is your 165, whatever, $175 million man, and he's not playing right now. So the assets that you actually have on the books, they're not the reasons, or at least they're not even 50% of the reason that you're winning these games. And the assets you don't have on the books are the reason you're winning these games. In large part, if you look at the single game box minus, almost every single game, it's Chris Boucher, Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown that's leading the way. So it's like, okay, that happens. Cade is not winning by himself in Detroit. Paolo is not winning by himself. Contavious Caldwell-Pope and Malik Beasley and guys like this, they're having a huge, huge impact on why why those teams are winning. So you do need those pieces. It's just, from the Raptors' perspective, I would feel better if the pieces that were actually contributing to the winning were long-term pieces under contract. If this winning was happening because Emmanuel Quickly and Scottie Barnes and RJ Barrett had figured out some beautiful synergy between themselves, that would feel a little bit different. But this winning is happening because you are obliterating other teams' benches, and it's largely due to a bunch of players who aren't really in long-term plans as per their contract. So I think the Raptors have a big decision ahead. I'll reiterate it again. I do think that this team can find a lot of value mid first round, late lottery. I think they're going to find value anywhere, but it's hard to watch guys like Victor Wembanyama, Amen Thompson, guys like that, and to think that's exactly what the Raptors probably would have drafted had they tanked at the right time in 2023. So a little bit of history repeating itself, but it's worth noting the Raptors have a very easy schedule the rest of the way. They have a lot of head-to-head battles with these teams that they're trying to chase, which means those games against Chicago, those games against Philly, you can't lose a single one of those games. But if you think of it from Philly's perspective or Chicago's perspective, like if I was a Philly fan, I'd be saying those games against Toronto, you can't lose any of them. Last night, every team that's behind you in the tank, they lost the game. You won the game, so you move up. But the distance that you need to close right now is really between you and Chicago. And if Chicago ends up not tearing it down at the deadline, I feel like that gap of 6 games is a really, really hard thing to match or a really hard thing to surpass. And even if your schedule is easier than Chicago's and significantly easier than Philly's, I think if you lose even 1 or 2 of those Chicago games, you're cooked, you're out, because now the gap that you need to bridge is like 8, and that becomes hard. So a lot of big decisions, but this is why Masai Ujiri gets paid the big bucks. Hopefully, this video gets uploaded. I want to reiterate the Penn Dance Film Festival is coming up February 27th to March 2nd. A lot of people coming, a lot of directors from all around the world. I hope you will join us. Tickets, individual tickets will go on sale today, later today, and passes have been on sale. Everything has been converted to Canadian dollars. For the last month, we've been selling passes in US dollars because our submissions were in US dollars, but now everything's moved over to Canadian. So you will be able to get those. And to those of you perhaps who have, financial need or whatnot, just hit us up, man. Hit us up for a couple tickets or whatever. That's no problem. It's great for the community to come out and enjoy some film. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a great one. Enjoy, and I will do my best to post videos after the next few games as we wait for YouTube to return our live streaming powers. Bye bye.